I, 38F, have always had a complicated relationship with my parents, especially my mother. Growing up, I was the responsible one, the one who could never do enough to please them. My younger sister Margaret, 36F, was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. When I had my son Ethan, 8M, 8 years ago, I hoped things would change. I was a single mother by choice through IVF, and while my parents initially disapproved of my decision, they seemed to warm up to Ethan. Or so I thought. For context, 5 years ago, my parents, both 65, hit financial troubles after my dad's business went under. They were facing foreclosure and possibly bankruptcy. Despite our rocky relationship, I couldn't let them lose everything. I had built a successful tech consulting business and was in a position to help. I agreed to cover their mortgage, $2,300 per month, car payment, $450 per month, and various utilities, approximately $600 per month, until they got back on their feet. They never did get back on their feet. My father took a part-time job that barely covered groceries, and my mother didn't work at all. Instead, they spent their time babying Margaret, who at 36 still lived at home and couldn't hold down a job for more than a few months. I was essentially supporting all three of them, but I did it because family is family, right? Last Thursday changed everything. Ethan has severe food allergies, and we've had a few scares over the years. He's usually very careful about what he eats, but accidents happen. I got a call from his school that he was having a reaction. By the time I arrived, the ambulance was already there. His face was swollen, he was having trouble breathing, and the EpiPen hadn't fully resolved the symptoms. The paramedics were preparing to take him to the ER, and I was terrified. In my panic, I texted my parents. Ethan having severe allergic reaction. Being rushed to County General ER. Please come if you can. 20 minutes later, as I sat in the ER waiting room while doctors worked on stabilizing my son, I got a response from my mother. We're busy with Margaret. She's having a rough day at work and needs our support. Hope Ethan feels better soon. My blood ran cold. Margaret works 3 days a week at a clothing boutique. A rough day meant dealing with rude customers or not getting enough commission. Meanwhile, my son was fighting to breathe. I didn't respond. I focused on Ethan, who thankfully began to improve after treatment. The doctors wanted to keep him overnight for observation because of how severe the reaction had been. That evening, once Ethan was sleeping in the hospital bed, I checked my phone again. There were several texts from my mother. The text from my mother made my blood boil. First, Ethan probably just ate something he shouldn't have again. You coddle him too much with these allergies. Then, Margaret is having a real crisis. Her manager threatened to cut her hours. And finally, let us know when you're done with the drama. Maybe teach Ethan to be more careful next time. I couldn't believe it. My son was lying in a hospital bed with 4 tubes in his arms after nearly suffocating, and they were more concerned about Margaret's tantrum over potentially losing a few hours at her part-time job. The dismissal of Ethan's life-threatening condition as drama, and the quotation marks around allergies, like they weren't real, made something snap inside me. I spent the night in the uncomfortable hospital chair, watching my son's chest rise and fall, thinking about the years I'd spent trying to earn my parents' approval and support. I thought about the thousands of dollars I'd paid to keep them comfortable while they treated my son and me as an afterthought. I thought about how they'd never once offered to watch Ethan when I had work emergencies, but would drop everything for Margaret's trivial problems. By morning, I had made my decision. As soon as Ethan was discharged and settled comfortably at home, I went into action. First, I called the bank that held my parents' mortgage. For the past 5 years, I'd been paying it directly from my business account. I informed them that I would no longer be making these payments and to direct all future correspondence to my parents. Then I did the same with their car loan company, their utility providers, their cable company, their cell phone provider, and even the monthly subscription boxes my mother enjoyed but never thanked me for. I also contacted the property management company of the small office space I'd been renting for Margaret's business ventures that never got off the ground. I gave notice that I wouldn't be renewing the lease next month. Margaret had used that space for her failed photography studio, her short-lived craft business, her 3-month stint as a life coach, and most recently, as storage for the inventory from her online boutique that sold exactly 2 items in 6 months. With each call, I felt a weight lifting. I was done being the family ATM while being treated like an inconvenience. My parents didn't even check on us until Sunday evening, 3 days after Ethan's hospitalization. My mother called, not to ask how Ethan was doing, but to complain that Margaret was crying because some influencer she admired hadn't followed her back on Instagram. That's unfortunate, I said flatly. By the way, I've made some financial changes you should be aware of. What are you talking about? She asked, suddenly alert. I'm no longer covering your bills, I explained calmly. Any of them. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then she exploded. You can't do that, she shrieked. We're your parents. We raised you. You OWES. I don't owe you anything, I replied, my voice steady. Especially not after you couldn't be bothered to come to the hospital when my son could have died. When you mocked his medical condition. When you put Margaret's hurt feelings over Ethan's life. You're overreacting, she sputtered. It wasn't that serious. And we have needs too. Well, you'll need to figure out how to meet those needs without my money. I'm done. I hung up as she was mid-sentence and blocked her number. I also blocked my father and Margaret. Within minutes, they were calling from different numbers, leaving voicemails ranging from tearful pleas to vicious threats. I blocked each new number and deleted the messages without listening to them. Then I did something I should have done years ago. I spoke to a therapist. I had a virtual emergency session that evening, and it was revelatory. She helped me see that I'd been trapped in a cycle of financial abuse and emotional manipulation. My parents had never viewed me as a daughter. I was a resource to be mined for their benefit. The fallout was immediate and intense. My aunt, Mom's sister, called to say my parents were beside themselves and that my father was having chest pains from the stress. I calmly explained what had happened with Ethan and their response. There was a long silence before she said, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. The next day, I received an email from Margaret calling me selfish and cruel, saying I was destroying the family. I replied with a single line. The family was destroyed when you all decided my child's life wasn't worth a trip to the hospital. A week later, my parents showed up at my house unannounced. I refused to let them in. Through the door, my father shouted that they'd received notices from the bank and couldn't make the payments. My mother wailed that they would lose everything. You have options, I said through the door. Sell the house and downsize. Dad can get a full-time job. Mom can work for the first time in decades. Margaret can support herself like every other adult. We're too old to start over, my mother cried. You should have thought of that before you decided Margaret's bad day at work was more important than your grandson's life. They eventually left, but the battle wasn't over. They sent flying monkeys, relatives, old family friends, even my childhood pastor, to guilt me into resuming payments. I held firm. It's been 3 months now. My parents did end up selling their house and moving into a small apartment. My father took a full-time job as a night manager at a hotel. My mother works part-time at a local bakery. Margaret moved in with a boyfriend I didn't know existed. And me? Ethan and I are thriving. Without the financial drain of supporting 3 adults, I've been able to increase my retirement savings, start a college fund for Ethan, and even plan our first real vacation. Sometimes doing what's right for yourself feels wrong at first, but I've learned that you can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm, especially when they wouldn't even bring you a glass of water if you were burning.